Hey everyone, Nick Marzinski here at TrappingLight.com. In my last tutorial I discussed how to handle a black and white conversion in Lightroom. And it's tempting to think at the end of that tutorial that that's really all it is and that's as far as you need to go. But that's not the case. See, I look at the black and white conversion process and I see two different things going on here. The first is where you make the decisions about how you're going to convert an image from a color image to a black and white one. And that's thinking about things like exposure and contrast and how the various color channels, the brightness values of those color channels are going to work. However, after all that stuff is done, then you get into the second part of a black and white conversion process where you can start making creative enhancements to an image. And in this tutorial, I'm going to start talking about one of those creative enhancements, and that's toning. And this part of the black and white process where I'm starting to make creative changes to my image, changes that are designed to make the image more interesting to look at and more dynamic, are really my favorite part of the process because it's somewhere in the process where I can actually put more of a personal stamp onto my images. Now, keep in mind that some of the stuff that I'm going to be showing you in this tutorial and in future tutorials on creative enhancements to black and white images won't necessarily work for every black and white image. There's not some magic recipe out there that you can use on any image to get a really great black and white. If you're making creative enhancements to a black and white image, or to any image really for that matter, it's important to determine with each edit whether the edit that you're making adds to the image or detracts from it. So let's get started. Now, as before with a lot of my recent tutorials on Lightroom, I'm in the Develop module here. And this is the first image that I used in my last tutorial. And I've already done the black and white conversion process. I've made my changes here to the basic panel as well as to the black and white panel with the black and white mix to these various color channels. So that stuff is all done. Okay, and the conversion at this point looks pretty good. But with toning, I can take it a step further. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, what the toning process is that we're adding a color tint to the image. Usually when you think of tinted black and whites, you think of things like sepia tones or selenium tones or that sort of thing. Back in the old darkroom days, you would use chemicals to replace the silver in the emulsion with some kind of silver compound. And nowadays, Lightroom allows us to do that, but without all the nasty chemicals, and it's handled right here in this split toning panel. Okay, now the split toning panel, it's fairly simple. There's only 5 sliders in there, but those 5 sliders can actually really do a lot to your image. And to start off, I'm going to give you an example of how this works. The split toning panel divides your image into 2 areas. It divides it into the highlights and the shadows based off of the lightness values in your image. Okay, so what I'm going to do in the highlights is I'm going to select, say, a really garish green color, and then in the shadows I'm going to select something that looks a little bit more horribly red. Okay, so here I've got a toned image and it's toned with green and toned with red. Okay, so the highlights are all green and the shadows are all red. So you can see this makes it very easy to see how Lightroom is dividing the image. Okay, now in the center here, and you can see, I should also mention, is that with the highlights, when I use the color picker, it automatically selected a hue and saturation as well as a hue and a saturation for the shadows based off of the colors that I selected in the color picker. Now, there's also this balance slider here, and what the balance slider allows you to do is adjust the boundary between the highlights and the shadows within Lightroom. So if you drag this slider to the left, the shadow toning is going to dominate the image. So now you can see that the image is pretty much all red. There's really not any more green in the image because I've dragged it all the way over to the left. If I drag it to the right, the opposite happens. Now the image becomes dominated by that highlights tone. So now the entire image is green tinted, and there's virtually no red in the image at all. As with everything else in Lightroom, if I double click the names of the sliders, it resets everything. So I'm just going to reset everything back to 0 because, frankly, the toning that I had there looked atrocious. In this case, what I want to do is I want to apply a brown, kind of a sepia tone, and what I want to do is I want to apply it only to the shadows. Now, there's a couple ways I can do that. One way is I can click in this little box here to bring up the color picker like I did before. And it even gives me a couple of presets. This one actually right here works pretty well to start off for a sepia tone. The other way that I can do it also is I can adjust the sliders here. That does the exact same thing. So if I'm going to use a sepia tone, I'm going to want to set my hue over in the oranges somewhere. Now you can see just by adjusting the hue, nothing changes. And the reason for that is because there's no saturation. So without that saturation, it's basically like the hue doesn't exist. So I also have to make the changes to the saturation in order to do that. And when I make this change to the saturation, I start dragging it up, you can see that that orange hue starts to come through. So that looks pretty good. And now that I've got some saturation, I'm going to want to adjust my hue a little bit. And I don't want it to go too close to either the yellows or the reds. I want it to kind of stay in that orange-brown sort of area. Once I've dialed in my hue and saturation, now I'm going to use a balance slider to determine how much of my image gets the sepia color. And in this case, what I want to do is I actually want to take some of the sepia out. I don't want it to be dominated by brown. I just want there just to be a bit of a hint of brown in there. And to do that, I'm going to slide my balance over towards the highlight side. I'm going to slide it to the right to remove some of that sepia. And so now this image is toned. This is what it started with, and this is where it is. It's just a little bit of subtle color added to this image, which I just think it makes the image just a little bit better. It gives it a more of a timeless quality to it. Let's move on to another example. This is a black and white image that I took at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And in this case, I want to do a duotone. And what that means is that I'm going to apply one color to the highlights and a different color to the shadows. And the way that this usually works best is if contrasting colors are used. So in this case, I'm going to use a blue shadow tone and a yellow highlight tone. Okay? And it's the same sort of approach, but now I'm going to be adjusting both the highlights and the shadows area. So I'm going to drag my hue over to the blue area for the shadows and then start boosting my saturation and see what I come up with. If I think that it looks too much towards purple, and in this case I do, I'm going to drag the hue just a little bit over until I get an effect that I like. And I think that that looks pretty good. The other thing that I'm going to do is for the highlights, I'm going to drag it over into the yellows. And what I want to make sure is that I don't go too green on it, because yellow it's right next to green, so you kind of have to watch it. But I think that looks pretty good. And then just simply adjust the saturation until I get something that I'm happy with. Once that's done, then it's simply a matter of adjusting the balance. So I don't want to put too much yellow into the image because I want it to really have kind of this cool quality except for the highlights. And so I'm going to just drag the balance down just a little bit to get an effect that I'm happy with, where I think that I've got a good balance of blues in the shadows and yellows in the highlights. And to me, this kind of toned image here is more interesting than the black and white image that I had before. The toning gives the image a different mood, something that's kind of missing from the original image. And now that I've shown you how to do your toning in the split toning panel, I want to also show you another area of Lightroom that you can do toning in for black and whites, and that's using the tone curve tool. So I'm going to zero all this stuff here, take it down to 0. Close the split toning. I'm going to go over to the tone curve tool. Now in this case, in order for this to work, you have to be in the point editing thing. So you have to make sure that this is in point editing. And you're going to have to switch your channel to one of the different color channels. In this case, if I want to replicate that blue-yellow split tone that I had to my image, I'm going to go down to blue here. Now, if you watched my earlier tutorial on using the tone curve tools to do things like cross-processing, you know that for these color tools, if you drag it down and to the left, it's going to add the complementary color of whatever this tone curve is. So in this case, the tone curve, it's a blue curve. Dragging it down and to the right, excuse me, not down and to the left, down and to the right is going to add the complementary color. So it's going to add yellow. If I drag it up or to the left, it's going to add the blue. So that's how these tone curves work. But I can also use them to split tone. In this case, if I want the shadows to be blue, what I have to do for the blue tone curve is I just have to drag my shadows up a bit, and you can see that it applies a blue tint to my shadows. Actually get rid of that right there. I'll select it to linear. Let's try that again. So there I've added a blue tint to my shadows. And now if I want to add that yellow tint to my highlights, it's a matter of creating a point on the tone curve and dragging it below the dotted linear line right there to add the yellow to my shadows, or excuse me, the yellow to my highlights. So any area of the image where the tone curve is above this dotted line is going to be blue toned, and any area where the tone curve is below this dotted line is going to be tinted yellow. So that allows you to really change the balance of your toning. So if you want less yellow in the highlights, then you just move it up, or you place a tone curve here to adjust where it crosses over from being blue tinted to being yellow tinted. And that allows you to change the balance, similar to how the balance slider works in the split toning panel. The difference by using the tone curve is that you have a little bit more control over what kind of tones you can use and how strongly those get applied, because you've got as many points as you want to set, and you've also got additional channels you can use. So one's not better than the other. The split toning is easier to use, but I'm also showing you how that tone curve tool works, because it can also be a powerful way for you to do either single tone toning on your image or split toning as well. Now, one more thing that I want to leave you with. Let's say that you found a toning recipe that you really like. So in this case, I really like what's going on here. As a matter of fact, let me just give it a little bit more yellow. I like what's going on here, and in this case, the best thing to do is to create a preset. If I like this effect and I know that I'm probably going to want to use it again, I should create a preset, because if I do that, then I don't have to go through playing with the curves or playing with the split toning to get the effect I want. I can just go right over here to my presets panel, find the preset that I want, click on it, and it immediately applies the effect. So what I'm going to do if I want to save this as a preset is I'm going to come over here. I'm going to click the Add New Preset. In this case, I'm going to also add a new folder, call it Toning, so that any toning presets I have are going to be saved in here. So I'll create that new folder. For this preset, I'm going to call it maybe Blue Shadow, Yellow Highlight. And because I did my toning in the tone curve, I need to make sure that the tone curve here is selected. I should also select the process version, because that's going to ensure that I'm using the latest process version of Lightroom. So I select tone curve, I select process version. I'm not selecting black and white because I don't want to use the same black and white conversion. I want to be able to do the black and white conversion independent of my toning conversion. So by not selecting black and white mix or the basic tone here in these settings, when I'm setting up this preset, this preset is only going to apply to toning. It is not going to apply to the black and white conversion. I just click create, and now within my toning presets right here, I've got this blue and yellow highlight. If I go to a different image, I just click on it, and the blue and yellow highlight is applied. Same thing with this image. If I like the way that this looks, I can create a preset for it. Now keep in mind that I did not use the tone curve tool to set this preset up. I used the split toning tool. So it's a little bit different. I'm going to create the plus again, and I'm going to call this, say, Sepia Shadows in my toning folder. And in this case, rather than clicking tone curve, I'm going to click split toning, because the split toning panel right here is where I set that effect up, and that's where I want this preset to be going to make that edit. So I'll just click create again, and now I've got a Sepia Shadows toning preset. If I go to a different image, click Sepia Shadows, immediately the edit is made. So that's it for toning an image and how toning can work either using the split toning panel or the tone curve panel within Lightroom. If you have any questions, again, feel free to either leave them on my YouTube channel or on my blog at trappinglight.com. Hope you have fun toning your black and white images using either of those methods, and as always, thanks for watching.